Welcome to the AI and Faith podcast. We are a community of expert technologists, professionals, and faith leaders bringing the ancient wisdom of the world's major religions to the ethics of artificial intelligence. Join us on this new journey and welcome to the conversation.
I think as we go forward with technology and smarter AI is just recognizing that it is a tool, that it's our choice for our families. I tried to show a bit of the ambiguity, as Brian said, of this isn't good, it isn't bad, but you need to make decisions about how to incorporate technology into AI into your life.
My name is Elias Kruger and I will be your host. Today's episode is an interview with two contributors to our recently published anthology, Faithful AI, Stories of Hope from 2045, which is now available on Amazon. Author Whitney Widener and contributor Brian Sigmund discuss a number of things, including parenthood, AI, technology, and much more. Take a listen.
Welcome, everybody. Today here I have author Whitney Widener and essay writer Brian Sigmund. We're going to talk about Nanny. Whitney, why don't we start with you? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I was born in Alaska, where the story Nanny takes place. I was raised in Southern California, went to UCLA for my undergraduate, and then I moved to Chile for a year to teach English as a foreign language. I fell in love with teaching and I fell in love with a Chilean. So I came back to California, bringing the Chilean with me. He went and got his PhD and I got my master's degree in linguistics. And then we went back to Chile, where I was a university professor in the English department there for 8 years. And now we live in Texas with our 2 kids. And I'm a freelance writer and currently working on my first novel.
And for those who are listening but have not read the book, can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for Nanny?
The inspiration for Nanny. I think a lot of the inspiration just came from the very, very long PDF that I was sent for the instructions on the writing. You guys had very, very detailed worlds that you had kind of already built, these parameters for us to write within, unlike any contest I had ever seen. So I sat with that for a long time and just kind of let some ideas generate, and most of them were too big for the word count limit that you guys wanted. And so I tried to get it smaller and smaller and smaller until it was a personal story. And that's how I finally landed on Nanny, which is about a young girl, a young mother who has been gifted an AI parenting assistant and kind of the ups and downs of learning to use that.
I think you went in a little bit about that process. Anything else you want to talk about the process besides kind of obviously following a very long privacy and kind of testing out some ideas? Did the ideas kind of came through just like life experience, or is it just like random ideas popped up in your head? I'm always curious about the process as a writer myself.
Yeah. I think in the beginning it was just random ideas, like the first ideas, inspired by movies and shows and life experience and just kind of everything. I don't always know where the ideas come from. I think once I have finished writing a story, I look back and think, oh, I think I was actually writing about this. I think I process a lot in my writing, and, I realized how much about motherhood I was processing while writing The Nanny. It's a very emotional story. And I think being a new parent is just a very emotional and very insecure and very vulnerable time. And so, yeah, I think in retrospect, I was writing about that, even though at the time I was thinking more of the parameters that had been set by the contest.
It's clear, even its own name, that Nanny obviously dives into kind of parenting, child rearing and all that. Now, that was a story within a compendium that talked about faith. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of the role of faith in Nanny, and that may not be as clear, but just wanted to hear more about that.
So the role of faith in the protagonist's life, she was raised by kind of an Alaskan survivalist, and there's a lot of Alaskan survivalists up there. I know I'm related to many of them. But she was raised by family who kind of rebelled against the technology and AI boom, who said, like, no, like we're basing our religion kind of on this idea that technology is bad. And so that you can't have both. You can't have faith in God and a relationship with technology or AI. And so that's where she starts, of kind of this rebellion against her family of, no, I'm going to live in the world and I'm going to get a job and I'm going to be on my own and I'm going to absorb all the technology that I was denied growing up. Then she kind of starts to question that through her relationship with the AI parenting assistant. And so for her, it kind of becomes this battle of, can I have faith in God and a relationship with, can I have faith in anything and have a relationship with an AI, or have this kind of dependency on technology? Are they mutually exclusive? And she doesn't come to religion at the end by any means, but it's more of a moral dilemma. Are they opposed, or can we embrace both? That's kind of her journey.
That's fantastic. And I really like that because it touches on something that we don't often pay attention, but it is how tendency within religious traditions to kind of shy away or have a bit of a rejection of new technology, at least initially until it becomes established. And to put that in the context of faith, and even to an extent, to a extreme extent, right? A survivalist who is really denying everything from society and trying to live on its own. I think that really highlights that conflict, that it's not always as clear. Maybe not something that we think first about technology. Oh, that it definitely creates some conflict with religion. But I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, kind of going back more to parenting, obviously you said that motherhood was a big thing, your experience of motherhood kind of as an inspiration and source for the story. So I want to ask kind of in two ways. So first, how did that experience as a parent color the writing, but also how the writing impacted your parenting?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. Yeah, it was a lot of, I think, my emotional journey and vulnerability that I felt going on the page as a new mother, and just how vulnerable new parents are in that moment to new information, to new books, to advice, and everyone has advice on parenting, right? No one gets advice like a new mother. You, or a pregnant woman, my goodness, so much unsolicited advice. But a lot of emotions in that too, if you want to make the right choice and you don't know what the right choice is. And so you're trying to weed through all this information. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we had something that we could rely on that would weed through all the information out there for us? So yeah, that was definitely kind of what I was working through on the page when I was writing it. How that impacted me as a parent, I think it is really interesting because my story does keep coming to mind. We use Alexa, which is probably the very, very dumbed down version of Nanny. I definitely kind of hear Alexa's voice when I read Nanny, but we do use Alexa. I mean, my son loves to play DJ and tell Alexa constantly the music that he wants to have playing in the house. But I have started having Alexa help us even with some homework where I'm with my daughter trying to get her ready for bed. And my son says, of course, when I'm in the middle of like 10,000 things in bedtime routine, and he's like, Mom, can you check my math homework? And I'll say, can you have Alexa check it? Can you just read her? He's like starting long division, you know? And I mean, I would need a calculator anyway to get through the long division answer. Like, just ask Alexa if it's right or wrong. And if it's wrong, I'll help you figure out what you did wrong. But we're already using that. And that's something that I had put in Nanny and didn't really think about. So, you know, the wrestling that she had with that is something that I think of too. Like, is this good that I'm teaching my son to double check with the computer instead of with me first? Is it good that I'm starting to rely on this? Like, what balance do we need to find, and what role do I want this to play in our family dynamic?
That's a fantastic example. I might try that in our house here. That is fascinating because I could still remember when we had especially our first one, right? And how obviously my wife was looking for advice or information anywhere. I was trying to help, but completely clueless as well. And the vulnerability of that, this desire to get it right, but then, yes, being overwhelmed with do this, do that, let them sleep, don't eat them, they must eat at a schedule. They can't, don't let them do whatever, and it's, it can be very stressful, and it's on top of not sleeping and other things. So I think that is a very real and relatable part of Nanny. Thank you, Whitney. Let me turn on to Brian. So, Brian Sigmund, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Brian Sigmund. I'm the CEO and publisher of Friendship Press, which is the publishing arm of the National Council of Churches in the United States of America. Been there for all of 2.5 months. Before that, I was at Abingdon Press, where I was an acquisitions editor for about 10 years. And then before that, I was doing doctoral work. So I got a PhD in biblical studies from Marquette University. So I've been sort of all over the place, a lot of different interests, a lot of different places where my life has touched on academic study of religion, the role of religion in personal lives and in churches. And then on top of all that, I have always had a unhealthy, healthy relationship with science fiction and science and technology. And so for several years now, I've been really paying attention to the rise of AI and the importance of that in our lives, and really trying to reckon with sort of the outsized impact of it, and really seeing religion as a way both to help people navigate all the different ethical and moral and existential questions that it raises, and also really wanting to see religion not get left behind in the conversation. Because I think very often in our churches, we are behind from the get-go and we're playing catch up. So I'm really excited to be a part of an organization like AI and Faith that's really asking these questions very early on. And that's how this project came about. Elias and I were talking about what would it look like to do a book project, and really that would explore use stories to explore the role of AI in religion. And so Elias and I are responsible for the very detailed handbook that you writers were given. We probably did overkill on that, but we ended up with some really good stories as a result. So I'm very, very happy with how this project turned out. Yeah, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee with my wife, Amy, and our 3 kids who are all elementary school aged.
Tell us a little bit of, obviously you read multiple stories, you were from the beginning, you were with this project from beginning to end. What most surprised you about, Nanny as the story itself?
The thing that really stood out to me about Nanny, there's a lot of things that stood out. Number one was how true to life it was. I felt like it was really grounded in a very plausible extension of current technology 20 years into the future. Mm-hmm. To me, it was very easy to see how something like Nanny, it's souped up Amazon, I'm not going to say the word because it'll trigger it on my desk, Amazon's Echo, the assistant, which we have all over my house right now. It's a souped up version of that, targeted toward parenting with some extra hardware updates that allow for very detailed high-level baby monitoring. The nanny crib, the cameras that are integrated into your home, all of that was very, very believable. And so that was one thing that stood out. The other thing that really stood out to me about Nanny was the level of nuance that it had in its evaluation and presentation of what Nanny was. I think we get a really good glimpse of the possibilities that something like an AI parenting assistant can offer, and the drawbacks, the scary things, the futures we don't want that can also raise. There was a lot of ambiguity in there in a really good way. And so that's really what stood out to me. I think this story was a really great exploration of the different things that are at stake. And I think I mentioned to both of you before, we did this writing contest to get the stories for Faithful AI, and I had never done a writing contest before. We had put together these parameters, we put it out in the world, and I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. I wasn't sure what kind of stories we were going to get. And we got our submissions, and I opened up, and Nanny was the first one I read, and I read that story, and I thought, oh, wow, this is going to turn out really good, because the first story I came to was this incredibly powerful, well-written, nuanced story. So thank you, Whitney, for giving us a really great gift in Nanny.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
No, fantastic. Totally agree. In your essay, you explore a bit the risk of bias, as it comes to developing technology like Nanny. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Sure. Essentially, Nanny is a recommendation engine that it's proactive. It sort of monitors what's going on in the room with the parent and the baby, and it is able to generate recommendations for the mom. Try this, try that. And so the question with AI is always, what's driving those recommendations? What values are underlying them? Why does it recommend one thing over something else? And so I sort of raised that question in my essay and looked for clues in the story about, obviously it's fictional, but nevertheless, there are clues in the story about what might be driving something like Nanny. And so at one point, Nanny recommends to the mother, such and such has been recommended by X number of pediatricians. So, okay, credentialed authority. Nanny is relying on credentialed authority that's rooted in Western medicine to drive some of its recommendations. And then another point, it says, okay, this video has been liked by 1.2 or 1.6 million something other people. So, okay, popularity judged by number of engagements is driving it. Number one, both of those things are very true to our current experience, where what we see online is filtered by algorithms that are driven by engagement and by some sort of authority. So that to me was very plausible, but it also made me wonder, if I were a parent engaging with something like Nanny, would I have any opportunity to tweak those values that are underlying Nanny? Could I say something like, I want to hear from non-Western medicine as I raise my child? Would I have an opportunity to tweak the recommendations? And we do get some sense of that in Nanny. Nanny initiates a conversation with Laura, the mother, about what are your priorities as you're raising Jasmine. Getting her to sleep through the night, is that a high priority? Things like that. So there is some engagement with that. But it did make me wonder, okay, when there's a recommendation engine driven by AI, you always wonder, okay, what voices, what perspectives are being left out? Where can bias creep in? And then what are the opportunities to correct that bias? Again, it's a fictional story, but I think those are some of the questions that it raised for me, and I think in a very good way.
It just reminds me of an example. I know when we had our children, one of the things that came up was this whole thing about co-sleeping. So do you let your kid sleep with you in bed, especially when they're babies? And in some cultures, it is like mostly expected. Everybody does it. And we were getting a lot of very stern like books saying, oh no, they can die, this can happen, or there's all these risks, and they should be independent, leave them in their crib. And so I wonder how something like that, right, a very specific example would play out in Nanny. Would Nanny say, yes, it's okay to coast it, or no, you must put him in the crib, right? And how that would play out in a household in China or in Nigeria or in the US, right? So if you have the same system that is sold everywhere globally, but providing the same kind of information, I think that presents tremendous ethical challenges, especially when it comes to parenting. That is such a culturally informed activity.
Yeah, and those things only get amplified as the child grows older, right? We get a snapshot of raising an infant, but of course the infant's going to grow. And so, as the child gets older, you're going to have to answer questions about dating, about extracurricular activities and participation in contact sports and things like that. All of these things are culturally driven. So what's the culture that Nanny is encoding and steering us towards?
Right. And I mean, I want to add an additional thing here, which is something I experience daily as we're raising our children right now, is that I think we're in a time where we can't just simply rely on, oh, my parents did that and it worked, so we're good, or so-and-so did that. There's so much experimentation happening right now, whether it's technology or different things. I can see my children dealing with things that I never thought about, right? So in some ways, there's a little bit of experimenting on our parenting too, which is honestly unnerving, to say the least, because you want to make sure that you're giving them the best, but then you don't really know, because I mean, books will be written in the future about how we raise our kids, but the books that we have now, it's about the past, right? So how could a technology kind of keep up with that when you don't even really have, let's say, data? Any of you have any reactions to that?
I mean, I think that is the challenge, right? We don't know. We have to act now without knowing everything as much as we would like, and I think that's always the case with parenting. It's always open-ended. You try to instill in your children the best values that you can, but you're going to release them into the world sooner than you want to, and you can't control everything. And so but at the same time, like, you used to be able to rely on your own experience for a lot more of that, right? When I was my oldest is in 5th grade. When I was his age, cell phones weren't even really a thing among people my age, much less something like a smartphone. But now a lot of his friends have smartphones, and I've got to remember, like, okay, when do I get one? What sort of parameters do I put on that? Those are questions that I'm having to navigate and he's having to navigate that I can't draw on any prior experience of my own, like what my childhood was like. It's limited in how it can inform that.
It's so interesting parenting cross-culturally. Like I had my son in California and I had my daughter in Chile, and they were wildly different experiences of having a newborn and a toddler. And the advice that I got in California was very, very at the time, do what works for you, and everyone's following a different method. And people would ask, like, oh, what sleeping method are you using? And what feeding method? And they'd have names for them and doctors they were citing. And it was a college town. So it was very, educated town, and everyone had their method that they followed. But that was also so overwhelming because there was so much information. You had to make choices. And then I got to Chile, and there was one way to do it right. Chile is a very culturally isolated country because it has the Andes Mountains on one side, it has the desert in the north, and it has the ocean to the west. And it's just been a very, very isolated culture for so many centuries. And like the cultural changes that happen are so slow because of its geographic isolation. And it's a developing nation. So there was like one way to do things correctly. And if we chose to do things in a way that was countercultural, we got a lot of backlash with very little understanding. But on the flip side of that, there was one way to do things. And so it was like, oh, this is the method that you feed your baby. Starting at this week, this is exactly what you do. And this will work because it works for every baby in this country. And there was a relief in that too, of like, oh, finally, somebody handed me the manual of like, this is how we do it. And it did work, and it was fine. The California way did work, and it was fine. And I think, yeah, would Nanny then kind of have its own, like, would you set up a system different for different countries? For different cultures? Would you say this is the Chilean nanny, and so all the data is going to come first through the Chilean pediatricians and the Chilean cultural advice, and which was a mix of Western medicine and kind of traditional medicine from the area? It's very interesting. I love the cultural aspects of all the different areas that those questions that can be brought up.
Yeah, no, a lot to say there. But Brian, I did want to ask you an additional question here. Nanny obviously tells the story of a single mom. The question that raises among many is, what does the rise of this type of assistive technology like Nanny spell out for the role of the father in child rearing, right? Because on one hand, you could see, oh, dads will be even less needed because now not just rely on their mother, their network, but also this technology. On the other hand, you have really a rise of parents being more involved. Both you and I were very much involved in our children rearing, and I think there's a tendency, especially around millennials, that's what I've seen, kind of saying, no, I want to be involved and all of that. But yeah, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on kind of that direction.
I think a big part of why Nanny resonated with me so much is because I was able to identify it a little bit with my own experience in bringing home our child for the first time. We got home. We had done all the preparation we could possibly do. We probably did. I feel like we probably did more than we did. We took an infant CPR course. My wife and I, we had conversations about what our values would be. Tried to do these what if scenarios. We read on becoming baby wise, and we had friends who had recently had babies, and they were very supportive. And we were able to talk to our parents. We felt like we were very prepared. And then we walked out of the hospital with our newborn, and I was like, oh shoot, they're just gonna let us leave with this human like that we're responsible for? Like, don't we have to sign something? Like, and it was and so even that, like, I felt like we were as prepared as we could possibly be, which is never enough, right? You're never prepared enough. But we were as prepared as anyone, and I was still felt this feeling of being overwhelmed a little bit, and wow, I guess we're gonna have to figure it out. And we did, and it was fine. And but to me, that's where it really correlated with my own experience as a father. And then I can only imagine, I had my wife right there with me, and we were supporting each other in this. And, we were taking turns feeding the baby at night. We came up with a system very early on where one of us would get up the first time and the other of us would get up the second time, and it felt very manageable that way for me, and I think she would say for her as well. I think the burden's always more on the mom, but I think even she would say it felt manageable. But also, the other thing I'll say about it is, and I kind of say this a little bit in the essay, is that Nanny is really at its best providing support for the parent. And so I think something like Nanny could be a support for the father as well as for the mother. So in our experience, in our family, we've each got different things that we do. I am the one who's like I'm coaching my kids' sports teams. Like that's something my dad did. It felt very important to me to be able to volunteer, and so I'm doing some of that. My wife was never a sports person. She just had other interests, but so that's something that I do is I volunteer, coach my kids' sports teams, and I use technology to help me with that. I never played soccer growing up. I just wasn't a sport that was around very much in the community I grew up in, but that's what my kids play. And so to coach them, I had to learn how to play soccer. And I used a lot of YouTube to learn how to play and coach soccer. So something like Nanny that could be like a real-time assistant, like, hey, what's a good drill to teach these kids that I could do in real time? Like, hey, this one is my plan just fell all the way apart in the middle of this practice. Give me a drill that I can do right now. That would be a godsend. So something like that, I think, could be a very needed resource for both the mother and the father when Nanny is supporting you as the parent in the role that you are already trying to do. It helps you be better and be more effective. I think where Nanny or something like Nanny would be a danger is when it sort of allows you to substitute for yourself, right? When it allows you to sort of sidestep some of your responsibilities or your desires, right? If I allow a parenting assistant that helps me do it better versus a parenting assistant that lets me get out of doing it, right? And I think that's really the danger. For me personally, I think that's the line.
No, I really like that answer because like a lot of things in technology, the answer is kind of it depends. And it's
exactly.
Like if you already have a parent or a father that wants to be involved, that is engaged, then suddenly Nanny can become an empowering tool, an enabling tool. On the other hand, if you have a parent or a father who was absent to begin with, Nanny's not going to do anything to help on that, possibly make things worse. And so it really kind of is the human factor at the end of the day that makes the difference in what kind of parents we want to be and bring into this situation. Following up, I have a few questions for both of you. So what is, starting with you, Whitney, what is the one thing you hope readers would take away from the story?
I think as we go forward with technology and smarter AI is just recognizing that it is a tool, that it's our choice for our families. I tried to show a bit of the ambiguity, as Brian said, of this isn't good, it isn't bad, but you need to make decisions about how to incorporate technology into AI into your life. Because I think, especially as artists, writers, right now AI is very scary because it is creative, and there are artists that are losing their jobs because of AI, graphic designers, voiceover artists, writers, like everything. So it's really easy, I think, to vilify AI. And there's validity to that. Of course, it is AI to take away our art, right? We want it to do our dishes so we can spend more time doing art, not the other way around. But I think we all know that the cat's out of the bag and it's not going to go back in. And so how can we make decisions that incorporate the tool into our lives in a way that helps us, but that doesn't take away the joy of parenting, creating those things that hopefully it was originally intended for to help with?
How about you, Brian?
My answer is very similar. For me, it all comes back to the need to engage this new technology, whatever that new technology is, with a sense of responsibility, with a sense of the power that it has, and therefore the import of the decisions that we make regarding it. I really like what Whitney said about, it's not good, it's not bad, but it is powerful, and it's going to have an effect. And so as we engage it, we need to take extra care, the way we would take extra care with any sort of tool that can be very dangerous. I'm a woodworker, and I really approach my table saw with this kind of healthy fear, because I know it can really hurt me or the people around me if I'm not very careful. And so the danger is maybe a little bit less immediately apparent with AI, but I think it's there nonetheless. And so I need to approach that with the same level of care.
Awesome. So Whitney, just to cap up, sounds like you are working on some additional things besides Nanny. First of all, obviously, I encourage everybody to get the book, Faithful AI, where Nanny is in, one of the short stories. But for those who want to follow you or kind of find out what you're up to, what should they do?
You can find me on Instagram. My handle is Whitney M. Writer, and I'll have little writing updates. And yes, I am currently working on my first novel, which is a young adult near sci-fi, and it has some fun AI stuff in it as well. So yeah,
Well, looking forward to seeing that novel come out. Brian, how about you?
You can check me out. Probably the best place is my website, briansigmon.com. Sigmon with an O, SIGMON.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram at Brian Sigmon Books. I'm going to be honest, I don't post in either place nearly as often as social media best practices say that I should. But you can follow me there. Yeah. So check out briansigmon.com if you want to learn about my couple of sci-fi books that I've got out there.
Well, thank you, Brian Whitney. This was a lovely conversation, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You can find the Nanny in our recently released book, Faithful AI, Stories of Hope from 2045, available at Amazon. Also, check out our previous interviews with other contributors on the book. In the meantime, follow and rate our podcast on your favorite platform and share it with your friends. Don't forget to follow us on your social media as well. We are on LinkedIn and X. Thank you for joining us today.